Hi, and welcome to webinar 3 in our series of Applying to Clinical Psychology. My name is Dr. Lucy Kozlowski. I'm a clinical psychologist who specialises in health psychology and staff healthcare wellbeing. And one of the areas that I'm particularly interested in is acceptance and commitment therapy and the implications for this for self-care and for healthcare staff. So this is an aspiring psychologist edition, and it looks at ways that we can approach our self-care using ACT when applying to clinical psychology. So today I'll talk through a brief introduction to ACT and then think about how we can apply this approach to self-care when applying for the clinical psychology doctorate. So ACT is based on the idea that humans are born to suffer, basically, which sounds a bit miserable, but ACT is based on evolutionary psychology ideas that note the role of our thoughts and feelings in terms of our survival system. So it thinks about ways that thoughts and feelings are set up to look for danger, look for threats to us, and to keep us safe. And basically, based on this idea, ACT encourages us to make room for these experiences rather than fight them or struggle against them, as that's a futile stance to take. So ACT encourages us to adopt psychological flexibility, inviting us to change our relationship to our inner experiences, making room for these experiences, accepting them as part of our makeup, if you like. Whilst encouraging us to continue towards our valued activities, therefore increasing our well-being and reducing suffering. So summing up ACT, it's based on the idea that we accept and make room for difficult and unpleasant thoughts and feelings, our inner experiences, including physical sensations like pain, tiredness, achiness, whilst connecting with our values, the things that are important to us and give us meaning, enrich our lives, and then take committed action in line with these values. So developing psychological flexibility incorporates 6 key areas, and these are the key areas that ACT looks to build up in the individual. So developing present moment awareness, which is aligned with mindful experiences, mindfulness. It invites us to notice our experience as it unfolds in each moment, noticing thoughts, feelings, sensory input, and as I say, accepting those, making room for those, allowing them to be present without struggling against them. And inviting us to take that observer stance. So observing this experience from a distance, noticing it, watching it, and separating us from our experience. And also taking that diffused stance. So noticing our thoughts, observing our thoughts, and recognizing them as just thoughts, mental events, rather than facts or a true version of reality. They're just trying to make sense of our experience as we go through life. And then added on to that kind of mindful stance are the 2 areas that we just mentioned, the valued action and the values that underlie our daily actions. So it invites us to connect with our values and then take action aligned with those values. So how does this apply to applying for clinical psychology? Well, I guess as psychologists or aspiring psychologists or healthcare practitioners, we naturally adopt a reflective position. And it helps us to be more in the moment, whether that's with clients or in the workplace, but also in the moment with our own experiences, noticing what's going on within us and adopting that observer or diffuse stance, making room for difficult experiences, and whether that's when we're sat face to face with a client and hearing some difficult stuff, or whether it's our own stuff that's coming up for us, and that could be in relation to clinical psychology, such as sad or frustrating thoughts about never acquiring a place or finding it a really competitive or challenging career. It's about making room for those thoughts and feelings to reduce the suffering and distress we experience. And then linking in with our values, and this is particularly important, I think, with clinical psychology or the application process, in terms of thinking about why we're applying to clinical, what's important to us about it, what our personal values are and our professional values linked to the career are, and thinking about the actions that we're taking already that align us with these values and give us a sense of enrichment in our lives and that sense of well-being. So when the assistants that I'm working with are applying to clinical psychology, I encourage them to build psychological flexibility, or in their daily clinical life as well, because this is relevant for us in our working lives every day. And I guess the key ways to build that psychological flexibility are connecting with our values, and taking actions that are aligned with our values, and having that present moment focus. It's easy to get caught up in a goal focus and a future focus, but actually connecting with the here and now, our values, and how we're already living aligned to our values can be really enriching for us and empowering. And also adopting sort of thought diffusion and mindfulness stances and practices to help us connect with the present moment, make room for difficult or unpleasant experiences whilst continuing towards our values to increase that sense of well-being. And then moving us towards a natural adoption of psychological flexibility. Once we're more familiar with the strategies that build psychological flexibility, we can start thinking about how it becomes a habit, and we don't necessarily need techniques or strategies, that we find that we are naturally quite psychologically flexible. And you may have found this already in your assistant psychologist posts or your other clinical posts, practicing sort of the third wave approaches, mindfulness, and other techniques can help to develop that psychological flexibility within us in our working lives. So a starting point really is to think about your values, who you want to be in the world, how you want to be, what are the values and ideas that drive and motivate and inform your daily life, your daily actions, what gives you a sense of purpose or direction or meaning in your life. And what's important for you in the workplace. How do you want to be? What sort of professional relationships would you like? What kind of approaches would you like to draw on when you're working? What is it that's brought you to the clinical psychology pathway? And think about what drives you, what gives you that satisfaction, that joy from your job. What elements of it are particularly important to you? Is it helping others, supporting others? Is it promoting psychological thinking in others? Is it adopting a more ecological view of distress or a more holistic view of distress? What are those particular values to you that are important? And why is this important? Well, I guess, if we're living linked to our values, then we get that sense of joy, that sense of enrichment from our working lives. And it also gives us direction in our careers. And it's probably what's brought you to clinical psychology in the first place, rather than a different field, because your values link on or map on to clinical psychology. So I invite you to take a bit of time and perhaps use this values compass to think about what your particular or personal values are in each of these areas. Whether that's relationships, friendships, employment, hobbies or interests, education, spirituality or religion. Have a think about what drives you and how you're already connecting with those values on a daily basis. Because one thing we're very good at doing with clinical is getting caught up in that goals focus rather than the values focus. And when we focus on those goals in the longer term distance, we can create a sense of dissonance within ourselves, and we can feel frustrated or sad or all those difficult feelings because we're not achieving our goals at this time. And when we adopt that more values-based focus, we realise that we're actually already connecting and engaging in ways that are important to us. And we're already taking that action that aligns with our values. And with that, when we adopt psychological flexibility, we might have difficult thoughts or feelings, but that doesn't get in the way of living aligned with our values. So we continue to take actions that connect us with our values, that enrich our lives, that enable us to be who we want to be and how we want to be in the world, despite the presence of those difficult thoughts and feelings. Typical ACT slogan you might have heard of is "feel the fear and do it anyway." And that's, it could be that the word fear could be replaced by sadness or anger or anxiety or stress. And we can have the feeling and we can commit to doing things we enjoy or want to do anyway. So essentially, adopting that kind of present moment focus, being in the here and now rather than kind of in our heads, focusing on the future and in our heads being in that future scenario. It's about being connected with what's actually happening, how we're actually living already, and is this aligned to our values. and having that values focus rather than the goals focus, which again brings us into the present and helps us to think about all the ways we're already living in line with what's important to us. It stops that kind of black and white thinking, I'm either a clinical psychologist or I'm not. I'm already living aligned to how I want to be, and clinical psychology might allow me to continue to live towards those values and enhance those experiences, but I'm also living aligned to those values right now. And adopting that diffuse stance, so those thoughts might come in that might get in the way of you taking action aligned to your values. Or it might, they might tell you kind of all these unpleasant stories about how perhaps you're not good enough, or you'll never achieve a place, it's too competitive. And once we start fusing with those thoughts and believing them and allowing them to overrule us, then we can become overwhelmed and feel quite frustrated or sad or down, all those difficult feelings. And those thoughts will come, as we talked about. Thoughts are designed to look for danger and to look for threats. And of course, you know, our jobs, our financial security is really important to our survival in present day times. So looking for those dangers will come up a lot in our careers. So diffusing from thoughts, adopting that observer stance, noticing and watching those thoughts and making room for them, whilst allowing them to come and go without automatically believing them, reacting to them, and accepting that a thought is just a thought, it's just a mental event. It doesn't necessarily mean it's true, doesn't mean it's real, doesn't mean we have to listen to it. It can help us create a bit of distance and space from those thoughts. And there's a huge number of diffusion exercises you can use. I've just popped some of the couple of the popular ones up here. But saying I'm having the thought that before a thought can help us to see it as just a thought and not something we have to automatically listen to, act on, or allow to overwhelm us. Or hearing the thought in a silly voice, such as Homer Simpson or Daffy Duck, or hearing it to a jolly tune like Happy Birthday or Jingle Bells, again can help us to just see that it is just a thought. It's something we can manipulate, it's something that we can get distance from, and it's hard to take it seriously when you hear it in a silly voice or a jolly tune. Naming the stories, so here's the I won't get on story again, or here's the, you know, I'm not good enough story again. We'll have thousands of thoughts a day, and most of them will be repeated from the day before and the day before, and learning to name that story and recognise that it is just a story, it's just something your mind's churning up trying to tell you could happen. Learning to recognise and relate to thoughts in this way helps to kind of reduce that impact that they can have on us. Thanking the mind for the thoughts, so again in respect of appreciating its survival job, recognising the thought is just trying to keep you safe, and seeing it as a friend or an ally, and just thanking the mind very gently and calmly and kindly. Thank you, I appreciate that thought, but I don't need it right now. Or sometimes people like the visual metaphors, leaves on a stream, or the railway station metaphor, where you're stood on the bank of a river watching leaves float down a river, and imagining your thoughts on those leaves coming and going, just floating by, and we're observing them, we're watching them from a distance, we're choosing a helpful thought to listen to if we need to, and just allowing the other thoughts to just continue floating by. And the same with the railway station metaphor. We're stood on a station platform watching trains come and go through the station, and we see our thoughts on the train. And if we notice that we've got on the train and we're caught up and fused with that thought and we've travelled away from the station, we can gently just bring ourselves back to the station. But practicing these exercises can help us to start just gently bringing that diffused and observer stance towards our thoughts, so that we don't automatically react to them, we're able to respond to them. Notice ones that are unhelpful, that might be telling us stories that might not necessarily take us in the direction of our values and might be exacerbating our distress, and we can choose to let those go, or make room for those thoughts. An important note here is to distinguish between helpful and unhelpful thoughts. So it's very easy to get caught up in that positive, negative thought thinking, but positive thoughts can be quite unhelpful, and negative thoughts can be quite helpful. And I think that's important to note. You know, we could have an exam coming up and have the thought, oh, I know all this, I don't need to revise. So we don't put in any effort, we don't revise, get to the exam and realise actually maybe I should have done some work. But that initial thought is quite positive. Whereas the more negative type thought, oh, I've got an exam coming up, I don't know anything, I don't know what I don't know if I can answer any questions. It's quite a negative thought, but if it spurs us on to revise, then it's quite a helpful thought. So I guess the important thing to acknowledge is whether the thought is helpful to you or not so helpful, rather than whether it's positive or negative or true or false. And practicing these diffusion exercises over time helps us to become more comfortable with seeing our thoughts from that kind of observer, diffused stance. And we don't necessarily need to rely on the exercises long term. It's just getting into that habit of spotting a thought and observing our thoughts from a distance. And then the concept of willingness, which again ties in with mindful approaches, making room for the thoughts and feelings and allowing them to be there. And with willingness, it's not about liking or wanting thoughts or feelings that are unpleasant or difficult. It's about allowing them to be there, noting them, making room for them. Again, appreciating their survival role. And accepting that these thoughts and feelings will inevitably show up, but we can still continue to act in valued ways despite these thoughts and feelings being there. And mindfulness practices can help us kind of develop this willingness or this accepting stance of these experiences. And there's a couple of experiences or practices I've noted here that are on the YouTube channel. That you can check out if you want to and practice yourself. But the 3-minute breathing space is a good one to regularly practice throughout the day, just checking in with yourself, noticing how you're thinking, feeling, seeing if you can make room for those experiences and continue on with your day in your valued direction. And just bringing it all together, so ACT likes metaphors. So if you're familiar with ACT, you may be familiar with the passengers on the bus metaphor. But this metaphor is basically describing or brings together the whole of the ACT approach for me. So in this metaphor, we are the driver and the passengers are our thoughts and our feelings. And essentially the job of a bus driver is to head to a particular destination. And in this metaphor, we're heading towards our valued destination as the bus driver. But inevitably, thoughts and feelings, passengers, will get on the bus because that's the job of a bus. And these thoughts and feelings will come into our lives because that's their job to protect us. But if we were to continue trying to fight them or get them off our bus will stop. It won't continue moving towards its values. It will just spend all its time wrestling with the passengers. And if we were to do that, wrestle with our thoughts and feelings and try and stop them or block them or get them out of ourselves, then we would stop that focus towards our values. Or if we were to listen to them and say, yeah, you know what, you're right, I am useless or I will never get on, then we might take a detour and we might go off our valued path or the path of the bus. And not necessarily listen to our values. We're listening more to the passengers and allowing them to bully us basically and push us off our valued path. So in this metaphor, the idea is that we allow those passengers to get on. We continue driving our bus towards its values, whilst allowing those thoughts and feelings to be there, but not allowing them to overwhelm us. They're just there in the background because that's their job. Doesn't mean we have to listen to them. So I guess the top tips really are to be in the present moment, in the here and now. Notice your values and try not to have too much of a goals focus. Try and adopt that values focus and explore how you're already living committed to those values that take you in the direction of clinical psychology on a daily basis. And practice self-care, self-compassion. Be kind to yourself because it is challenging. But practice that self-kindness. And if you want to, practice the exercises that are on the channel to help develop that mindful stance. So follow us on social media if you wish. Subscribe to the Third Wave Psychologist YouTube channel for the exercises. And keep in touch. I'll speak to you soon.